Thank you, Heather. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Harpring. I'm the town manager for the town of Indian River Shores. I'm here with our town attorney, Pete Sweeney, and our consultant from Kimley-Horn, Allie Palmer. We're here for a very brief overview of our status and where we are with the Phase 2 piece of our Land Development Code review. As everyone's aware, we've been conducting a Land Development Code review. We had Phase 1, we had a similar open house. Those changes were reviewed and approved by council, and we also are now going to have this particular discussion. And just briefly, what we'll do is when I conclude my remarks, which will be very soon, you're welcome everyone, I'll turn it over to Allie, and she will go through the PowerPoint that we have. Keep in mind, for anyone, this is going to be taped and available for replay at your discretion or convenience. Just from a scheduling standpoint, once we conclude this, we continue to take input at our dedicated email address, ldc@irshores.com, and we take input from anyone that wants to send us comments or suggestions about the Land Development Code. From here, what we will do is review and meet at the staff level with everyone here, determine what comments or changes or modifications we may need to make to the package that we have here today, and then our goal is to present an amended ordinance at first reading in the April Town Council meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over to Allie Palmer. Allie, thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks, Jim. Glad to be here. So I will try not to put you all to sleep with all this very exciting information on the Land Development Code. Let me see here. How do I click this? Okay, there we go. So, Allie Palmer with Kimley-Horn. I am a community planner, so that is why I am here helping you all in the town with updating your Land Development Code. As you may recall, I was here last fall with the first, what we call Phase 1, or Round 1 of the Land Development Code edits and updates that came to Town Council in September 2023. And those updates were really to address just some inconsistencies and administrative details of the code. Our next phase, which we had talked about back then, and what we've been working on since that time, is more of an overall reorganization of the code so that it becomes a more user-friendly document for you, for town staff, and for anybody from the public that would like to come to town and apply for certain requests. So we went ahead and looked at the overall code to evaluate procedures, processes, and standards as part of that, this Phase 2 that we are in today. There are a couple sections of the code that are not within the Land Development Code but had implications because of different topics that are listed within the Land Development Code. So there are two edits proposed as outside of the Land Development Code that are within chapters 91 and 98. Chapter 91 addresses sea turtle regulations, just making sure that they are consistent with the other parts of the code, and also, of course, with state requirements. Similarly, in Chapter 98 with tree protection, the same thing there. We updated them that section to make sure that it was consistent with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection requirements. The remaining updates you'll see today are and so I just wanted to kind of point out that those two particular sections were not within the Land Development Code. So moving forward, I will try to run through these as efficiently as possible. Again, as Jim mentioned, if there's any particular questions about something specific after the presentation, we're happy to answer those because this is a workshop format. So we're going to start with Chapter 160, which is the Introduction Zoning Districts Design Standards. You'll see on each one of the slides moving forward, one thing that we took like a holistic or wholesale, I guess, approach to throughout the code was updating the definitions section for almost every single chapter that we worked on. We found that the definitions were duplicative. They were all over the code in different sections. Sometimes the same word had different definitions. So you'll see at the very beginning of each of these slides, every chapter chapter, we went ahead and created a definition sections and replaced words that were not in the code with words that were actually in the code, and gave them better definitions so folks can actually understand what the code is asking them to do. So that takes care of that laundry list item. As far as 160, we did a few things in 160. In .02, we added criteria for the placement of permanent emergency generators. We removed the C2A zoning district and combined it with the prior commercial C1A zoning. We also updated limitations on non-vegetative decorative objects in front and side yards for residential uses, and we created a non-conforming use and lot section. In Chapter 161, again, updated definitions section. This is the supplemental regulations of the code, so this is kind of where we put many things that don't really fit in other sections of the code. So one of the items that used to be in supplemental was parking. We moved the parking to be from 161 to 162 so that all the parking and vehicular regulations were in the same place so that people could easily understand what all the regulations were in regards to that type of those requirements. We also combined general design standards section with the general design standards. We added additional solar panel siting regulations. Those are just roof-mounted residential solar, by the way, not freestanding. And then we also just reworded a few things in .08 to clarify some of the existing restrictions. As we continue, supplemental regulations is quite a large section, so there was a few other items that we addressed in this area. We moved historic properties. There was a very small requirement, or short, I should say, requirement section for historic properties that kind of stood alone, so we just moved that over to coastal protection. We moved water and sewage to the site plan development process so that, again, when folks come in and look at doing any sort of site development, they can see all the requirements at once in one area of the code. Again, just going back to that user-friendly document. We combined various sections on the encroachments. This is like utility encroachments and easement encroachments. Again, we just sort of refreshed that so it was easier to read, and combined the different sections that were relative to those types of requirements. We also removed some of the conflicting information in regards to swimming pools, and we relocated it into the building and setback requirements for screen enclosures in swimming pools. So there was essentially two different discussions happening on swimming pools, so we put it all in one place. And then we moved sea turtle protection to the newly created section that I spoke about earlier on in the presentation. There is a new section of the code in this particular chapter for gas stations and convenience stores, which is now based on has always been based on, but now in the C1A code of a conditional use, which means it has special criteria, the same as it always has, in order to build any sort of gas station in the town. Okay, moving on to Chapter 162, parking and loading. So this is, I had referred to this earlier on. We had relocated some items to this section related to parking so that everything was in the same place. We created a parking in residential areas section, as well as other vehicles besides licensed automobiles section, and also created an enforcement section that discusses how these vehicles parked in the town are going to be regulated moving forward. In Chapter 163, Landscaping and Walls, we looked at aligning language with Table 160. Table 160 is where all the lot requirements are for every single zoning district. So we just wanted to make sure that anything that was required in landscaping and walls was consistent with your major regulations for all your different zoning districts. So that just provides some consistency there. We specified site elements and materials, and we also updated the language to be a little bit more clear regarding visibility triangles. Visibility triangles is that area between the roadway and the driveways to make sure that you have low-lying vegetation and that you're not blocking views of oncoming traffic. Signs, we all love signs, chapter 164. You had a section called real estate signs. We just changed that to temporary signs so that it could kind of capture anything else that was out there as far as people putting signs in the ground that were temporary in nature, so that if there's anything else other than real estate, it would also be regulated under this section of the code. We updated it for clarity. We added further definition on size requirements, and then some of the information from .14 was moved to .06, which is just a relocated section. Chapter 165, floodplain management and damage prevention. The big change here is we retitled it. It was previously called subdivisions, but in this particular section of the code, it was really talking about flood management for subdivisions. So we just renamed it. And then we also added a subsection on cluster development and density transfers. In the actual subdivisions chapter, 166, we made a few updates there. We reorganized it for clarity on administrative tasks, and then we included a subsection on environmentally sensitive street design so that it was taking into account some policies that you have in your comprehensive plan, because we always want to make sure we're consistent between those two documents, the comp plan and the land development code. In Chapter 167, Environmental Regulations, we added a subsection to be consistent with state statute. Again, this goes back to my earlier comment about making sure we are consistent with anything that's state required and sort of leading us to look at the state regulation versus having additional regulations that may conflict with it in the code. We also clarified the body responsible for approving dune crossovers to make sure, again, that we were being consistent with state regulation, and there's now a subsection on coastal management infrastructure. And lastly, we updated the table on the coastal infrastructure to be consistent with FDOT requirements, which is Department of Transportation. Also in 167 on the environmental side, we moved some things around, again, just for clarity. I won't go through all the details there. There is a new section now about natural groundwater aquifer recharge areas. Again, to be consistent with the comp plan, there was a policy in the comp plan regarding natural groundwater aquifer recharge, and as well as riparian buffers. So both of those code sections now align with the policies that are in your comprehensive plan. Chapter 168 is your development review procedures. So one of the things that we did here was that we renamed this the section that talks about how an applicant can come in and apply for certain types of development. We renamed it to site plan development process, and we combined the two sections that talked about permitting and site plan review, just to make it, again, a little bit more user-friendly for the public when they come in and they want to do something. It's all here in this one section, so they know exactly. It's very clear as to what they will need to do moving forward if they want to do any development or modifications in the town. We moved some information to the concurrency management system that had to do with level of service, so making sure that you have utilities and roadway capacity and all those types of things in the town. We put it all in one place under your concurrency section. And then we also moved nonconforming uses and lots over to 160, which is where all your other types of uses are listed. So folks are very clear on what types of uses are permitted, prohibited, nonconforming, et cetera. And then I think this is the last slide. So everybody can take a deep breath. 169 is now your concurrency management system. So again, that is where all the discussion is on your level of service and all the requirements that somebody would have to meet if they came in to develop a new type of use in the town, making sure that they had all those types of level of service met as far as utilities, traffic, school, if it's residential, recreation, things like that. Oh, I was right. So that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Allie. I appreciate it. First, before we move on, are there any questions for Allie on the presentation? Just a couple of things. Process-wise, moving forward, I did foreshadow a little bit what the process was for this particular package. And moving forward, after we review this, we will do what I've been calling phase three, but an ongoing and deeper look at a couple of particular items that we're looking at that aren't necessarily, excuse me, directly and solely related to the Land Development Code. I'll note again from a foreshadowing purpose, we're looking at the jungle trail and dock ordinances for a number of reasons, to include working with the county to ensure, because of their proximity and their involvement, really to ensure their full involvement in it and make sure that we don't miss anything in that regard. I would also be greatly remiss if I didn't thank the PZV members that I was able to meet with, Chair Gundy and PZV member Mr. Carbon, provided great insight, great input, and continue to help the team here with what we're doing. Also, I want to thank all the council members for taking the time to sit with me and go through all the changes in great detail. I appreciate that. And our team here internally, again, I would be remiss if I didn't note, in particular, our building official, Fred Held, who is here this morning, who brings to bear a great amount of experience in his area endeavor. Of course, our town attorney, Pete Sweeney, and Ali Palmer, who just did a fabulous job for the town with Kimley-Horn, and also her co-conspirator, Hadley. Sorry, Peter, just mentioned Hadley as well, because we work, we meet, and this is going to be an ongoing process to try to make sure that if nothing else, when a resident or a citizen takes a look at the statutes and the ordinances, while they may have questions, it's going to be a lot easier to navigate, a lot easier to find things, and it will be continually updated and consistent with what we have to do. With that piece, are there any questions at all that we might have from the audience? Great. At 10:17, as it were, we'll go ahead and conclude the open house and thank everyone for being here. Mr. Mayor, Ms. Gundy, Mr. Carbon, and Mr. Held.